On behalf of Chris, a very warm welcome to our show today. Chris will be with us in a minute. Wycliffe Musalia Mudavadi is right at the center of the current political storm blowing over the country called Kenya. But how much do you know about the man? On today's explosive show, Chris reveals lots of information about Mudavadi. Most of it is stuff Kenyans are unaware of. And nobody has ever talked about it before. This jaw-dropping information helps anybody anticipate this man's next move and the impact that it may have on the 2022 general elections. Without wasting any more time, over to you, Chris.
In this life, there is something known as paying your dues, to become whatever you end up becoming later. Because every human being is born with a purpose, a specific, special purpose given to you by God Almighty. Kenyan musician Joseph Kamaru struggled on the streets of Nairobi for decades before he became famous and reasonably wealthy. Fame normally comes with wealth. He paid his dues before he became famous and before he became the superstar we all remember. I always loved his music even before I got to understand the Kikuyu language later in my life. Paying your dues is one of the hardest things in this life, because people will always tell you you're dreaming. People will always tell you, go out and get a job like everybody else. In the early years, as I struggled with the Kumekucha brand, that time a blog, there are some family members who came to me and suggested that I see a shrink. I visit a psychiatrist for counseling. I remember once meeting an old schoolmate in the years when I was struggling, and we had a few drinks. And when people get a bit drunk, they start speaking the truth. And he told me in the face, Chris, you're very talented, but the path you've chosen, it is impossible to succeed. Of course, what he meant, go out and make as much money as quickly as possible and become as successful as me. At least give me competition. That's what he really meant. He didn't say it, but I understood immediately. Incidentally, that old school friend ended up on the board of a national company. That national company, which you all know very well, ended up in serious financial problems. And these problems were traced back to some key financial decisions he made on behalf of the company or on behalf of the national interest that were reckless, designed to get quick success for that company, quick prosperity, and of course quick fame for this old school friend of mine. And I'm saying this with the utmost respect for my friend. But I mentioned this example to highlight advice given to me by my political lecturer for years, decades. And that is, never take a shortcut. When you find that you're on the route that is a shortcut, get back. That's the wrong way. Get back and do it the right way. Take the long route. That's the secret of life. And in the long route, you have to pay your dues before you finally arrive. A politician like Raila Amolo Odinga has paid his dues many times over. That is why he is where he is today. He's not in government, yet he's so powerful. And even if you try very hard, it is difficult to be like Raila Odinga. You cannot buy his position, even with all the money in the world. You must pay your dues. Oops, my apologies for that ranting. But I like to think that those who come across this channel also take away gems, valuable wisdom to help them succeed in this life and to help them stay on the straight and narrow, on the long route to success while paying their dues. But our topic today is a politician known as Wycliffe Musalia Mudavadi, a man who is currently bang in the middle of controversy, bang in the middle of our politics. And there are very many things people don't know about the life of Musalia Mudavadi that is terribly relevant in understanding his current position and the decisions he may take in the near future. To fully understand Musalia Mudavadi and his path in life to where he is today, we cannot avoid looking very briefly and very quickly at the life of his father, a Kenyan whom even older Kenyans do not know very well, do not understand their life very well. Moses Subston Budamba Mudavadi, Musalia's dad, who passed on in 1989, was one of the most powerful cabinet ministers the country called Kenya has ever seen. Although many Kenyans are not aware of this. The senior Mudavadi was the only cabinet minister who would walk into Daniel Toroitich arap Moi's state house without an appointment. Oh yes, even people like Nicholas Kipiator Biwott had to call in advance. Actually, wait for this one, the senior Mudavadi was Moi's mentor for many decades. You see, Moses Mudavadi was an education officer in colonial Kenya and was responsible for many promotions Daniel Moi got when he was a mere teacher. It was the senior Mudavadi who was responsible for Moi's appointment as the principal of Kabarnet Intermediate School in the 50s. Moses Mudavadi was an educational officer in the Rift Valley. And we know that the relationship between the two men went beyond just work, because Moses Mudavadi's second wife, Rosabella, who hailed from the Kalenjin community, met her husband through Moi. That is an important piece of information to understand what happened later in Kenya in the 90s. You know, as a young journalist in the 90s, I always used to hear that Musalia Mudavadi is related to Moi. Yeah, they are relatives. And the person who gave me this information from the intelligence community is the kind of person who did not talk much. They could not answer your questions. Yeah, they just gave you a piece of information and then they remained mum. You asked all the questions you wanted. They didn't give you any further information. They like to leave you hanging. And so I went to my other major source of information, my political lecturer. He didn't know anything. I solved that mystery many years later. Anyway, the young Mudavadi, Musalia Mudavadi, went to Nairobi school after a very brief stint at Jamhuri High School. Nairobi school in those days was an elitist school ya watoto wa wakubwa. Excellent facilities, the best teachers in the country could find, some of whom actually set the exams. So this was a huge advantage for those who managed to go to such high-cost, elitist schools. If you attended some school in some obscure rural area, you can understand how there would be no competition, even in national exams. And by the way, One of Musalia's classmates at Nairobi School was a man we all know very well, the vice chair of the Jubilee Party, David Mudavadi. And so Musalia finished high school and was admitted to the Nairobi University for a degree in land economics. But while he was at the Nairobi University, something very serious happened that threatened to send the young Musalia to the hangman's noose, or at best, the rest of his life in prison. I'm of course talking about the 1982 botched coup attempt. Now I've done another video on this channel, which I highly recommend, that proves the 1982 coup was not even a coup. It wasn't. It was an intelligence operation. You can check that out later. I've put a link in the description area below. And so Musalia Mudavadi, David Mudavadi, and other university students were in the cooler, awaiting trial for their involvement in the failed coup. Now at the time, Musalia's father was already in cabinet. Indeed, it's very instructive that Moses Mudavadi, the senior Mudavadi, joined cabinet shortly after Moi became president. Indeed, he joined politics shortly after Moi became president. These were old friends. And the president could not leave his mentor out of the mix. And so while the other university students remained there for long periods of time, Musalia Mudavadi was quickly rescued. After the coup, things were so bad that if you're in such a problem, the only person who would have rescued you, the only person in the entire world who would have had the power to rescue you, was the President of the Republic of Kenya. And being the disciplinarian he was, the late Moses Mudavadi, on rescuing his son from prison, immediately sent him on exile to Vihiga, to Mululu, where he was ordered to stay for almost a year, to learn his lesson. Musalia returned from exile in Mululu to finish his university course and briefly worked for the National Housing Corporation. You can guess who organized that. This was a government corporation. And then he got a much better job in the private sector with a company called Tyson Habenga Limited, which was along the lines of what Mudavadi had studied at the university. Tyson's at the time was owned by a very famous Kenyan called Peter Habenga Okondo, who was a politician from Busia for many years. And incidentally, Bwana Okondo was the first Kenyan black African to qualify as an accountant. Siku hizi tunawaita CPA. And of course, Okondo was a cabinet colleague of Moses Mudavadi, Musalia's dad. Now, at around this time, Moses Mudavadi was clearly ailing. It was very visible from the photographs taken in public. You can see one of them on your screens right now. And nobody knew what he was suffering from. And when he passed on in 1989, Kenyans got to hear for the first time of the name Musalia Mudavadi, because his son inherited his father's parliamentary seat, Sabatia, without even an election. He was unopposed. In those days, Kanu, Mama na Baba quickly discouraged anybody who had any ambitions of inheriting that parliamentary seat. And so the young Mudavadi ended up in parliament at the tender age of only 28. And as soon as he landed in parliament, he did not start in the back benches like everybody else. He was promptly appointed to the cabinet, where he suddenly now sat with many of his late father's friends, people he respected, people he used to call Sir, including the man who had given him a job, Peter Okondo. And within no time, Musalia was handling the extremely powerful docket of Minister of Finance. Huyu mtu amefanya land economics, finance. Si ni kitu moja? Weka yeye hapo finance. Land economics, of course, has got nothing to do with finance and managing the finance of a country. But Musalia did well. He was a quick learner and is credited at the time with being a major factor in the turnaround of the Kenyan economy. And I remember in those days, there was something which really puzzled me, and indeed puzzled many Kenyans. Because Musalia Mudavadi was clearly one of the few in Moi's cabinet who was untouchable. Now that didn't make sense. Musalia was not from the Kalenjin community. And of course it was at around that time that I got that info from an intelligence officer that actually Musalia was related to Moi. But I didn't understand how. But one thing was for sure, Moi completely trusted the son of his mentor, Moses Budamba Mudavadi. Because at the tail end of 2002, when all the KANU bigwigs abandoned Moi for the opposition, Akina Saitoti, etc., Moi appointed Musalia Mudavadi vice president. And Mudavadi has the distinction to date as being the shortest serving vice president in the history of our country. He served for only about 2 months before the general elections arrived and KANU lost. And of course Moi was retiring, and so he retired from politics. In my opinion, from that point going forward, Musalia Mudavadi's political career suddenly became very shaky, with lots of ups and downs. It was not as smooth as it was before. And so the simple question I have for you today is as follows. Did Musalia Mudavadi pay his dues to deserve wanting so badly to be our next president? I want you to answer that for yourself.
That was awesome, Chris. And now I have the question of the day for you guys. What do you think Mudavadi is going to do next? Until next time, this is Amber for Kumekucha.